Are you ready to get coached on how to stop binge eating in secret? If so, let's get into it. Welcome to the Live Unrestricted podcast, a show where you'll learn how to heal your relationship with food and your body so that you can focus your time and energy on more important things like your personal growth. I'm your host, Sabrina Magna, food freedom coach, and my mission is to help make your life happier and healthier without stress, overwhelm, or guilt about food. If you love the show, please do go out and share it. And if you're looking for support with your relationship with food, details about my programs are in the show notes. Thanks for spending time with me today. Now let's jump in. All right, my friend, welcome back to the Live Unrestricted podcast. I'm not going to do a super long intro today because there is so much value that is packed in the coaching over coffee session that I have for you today. If you're new here, there's something that I really love doing, which is these coaching over coffee sessions. So I've got a bunch of listeners who will fill out an application form with questions that they would like to be coached on. And what I love about these sessions is that not only am I able to help my community, but then when I share these coaching sessions, they get to help the thousands of listeners that I have here on the podcast as well. Don't worry, everyone who applies and does one of these coaching sessions has full consent and awareness that this is going to be aired on the podcast. I would never do that without their consent. So without further ado, today we're talking about how to stop binge eating in secret. So this is for you if maybe you're someone who you'll eat really quickly when people aren't around. You feel like you're doing something sinful. You don't want people to see you doing it. You might do it at the end of the day when everyone has gone to bed or during these pockets or windows of time where people aren't around. You might do it in your car at the end of the workday. And this is a pattern that you've been trying to break for years. Maybe you've tried keeping certain foods out of the house, and no matter what, you haven't been able to stop the pattern for good. And what you're going to learn in this episode is what you're missing, what you're not addressing, right? We're going deep underneath the surface, not just these quick fixes, but we're actually addressing the root cause of why this keeps happening. And you're going to hear me walk Danielle through a very thorough exercise, a step-by-step framework that you can apply to your own life so that you can start creating peace and calm around your favorite foods so that you can trust yourself around them. You can have a bit and enjoy it without losing control and overeating. You can bring the food in the house, have chips and candy and chocolate in your pantry without it being done within 1 or 2 days. So I don't want to go too long on this intro. Let me play this coaching session with the incredible Danielle. The question that you submitted was that you mentioned I was in an unhealthy relationship and there was a lot of judgment towards me and my size, food, and exercise choices. I started eating and binging in secret. It's been years and I still do this. How do I stop? You are definitely not the only person who is struggling with this. Might be feeling so frustrated because when you're stuck in that cycle, it might be you wake up every morning and you're like, today is going to be a good day. Today I'm going to finally break this pattern. And then by the end of the day, you fall back into it. So let's just get started. And what I would first like to know is I always, when I'm working with clients, I like to know a little bit about their past and their history. So can you start by telling me about when your struggles with food and your body image first started?
I grew up in a household that really, there was no judgment about that. And we didn't have much money. So in terms of what we ate, the restrictions were only on quantity in the sense that there was only so much to get through the week. So sometimes it was just like you would have something to eat, but you didn't always have a lot of choice. But I do remember my cousins always talking about their weight, their size, don't eat this, don't eat that. And I actually remember specifically being like 8 years old and thinking like, oh my gosh, am I too big? Like, is my body okay? And starting to compare it with others. But I really don't think that major issues with my body image and food started before my late 20s. For some reason, I think I was going to a resort or something, and a bunch of women were going, and we were all talking about losing 5 pounds before we went. And that was at the time where clean eating was the big thing. Mm-hmm. So it was that whole lifestyle versus diet conversation where basically you are being told like, oh no, this is just for you to have a healthy lifestyle. It's not a diet. So me trying to follow the rules of that continued for many years of always thinking about, okay, what am I putting in my mouth? What am I putting in my body? Is this clean enough? Is this good? And then after that, I would say the biggest shift happened during that relationship where my partner at the time was very focused on body image, working out, what he ate and what around him looked like, what others around him looked like. And that's where it really started. Like he would cook every single meal, but it wasn't, I mean, I know that sounds ideal. Like, oh, my partner cooks a meal for me every night. And I know when people visited, they always made a comment about that, about how sweet it was. But it was really a control thing about what we eated. So if I cooked, he wouldn't eat the food, regardless of what it was. He always had to be in control of what we were eating. And then like what we call junk food, like anything that wasn't good for you, he would like not have in the house. And if he saw me eating something like that, there were a lot of comments made. And then also there was the working out side of things. So I've always been someone who liked exercising. I've never really been into sports or anything like that. I just always did it for fun because I enjoyed it. But then it became an obligation of like, if you don't work out this much, you're not trying hard enough, you're lazy. And ultimately, after a few years, that relationship ended. But all those thoughts have stayed with me ever since of like, I know on a logical level that this isn't how things really are. Like the expectations were really not sustainable. But like for myself being able to actually change the way I'm thinking, I don't seem to be able to get there.
Yeah, I totally understand how you feel. And this is the frustration that a lot of women feel. It's understanding that your thought processes and the way that you think about food and your body and exercise are not serving you, are not helping you. And it doesn't even have to be just in food exercise. It could be in relationships, self-esteem, your relationship with work, with money. And it's when you're on that fence knowing I want to think differently, I want to feel better, but I don't know how. So what happens is that what's happening is things intellectually, but you haven't gone to your subconscious mind yet. So it's like that iceberg metaphor. You've touched on the 5%, which is what you logically and consciously know, but there's still that 95%, which is responsible for driving your actions on a daily basis. So you mentioned that your relationship ended a few years ago, but the patterns and the behaviors and the thoughts have followed you. At what point did you start struggling with overeating and binge eating?
Well, the binging started during the relationship. Any opportunity I had to like eat forbidden food, if no one was around, I would take it. And like at the time, I only saw it as like, oh, I'm just having a treat while I'm not going to be judged for it. And then there was a time where it was the opposite after the relationship ended and there was a lot of stress for multiple reasons. I actually basically stopped eating for a while. And like, I remember some days where like I'd be so tired in the afternoon and then I'd eat an apple and be like full of energy, like, and realize, oh, I have to put something in my body. Like I put nothing in my body all day. But the thing that happens with that is you lose weight and then people start complimenting you about how good you look. Mm-hmm. And then I went through some health issues where I broke my ankle very seriously and couldn't go anywhere for a while. And then I got Lyme disease shortly thereafter. And then that's when sort of so when my ankle was broken, I had no control over the food in the house. Other people were shopping. But that binging got worse at that point because I guess I was trying to keep restricting to keep the weight down, but then would get the cravings, and there was no technically food that was forbidden.
Mm-hmm.
But all of a sudden I had to just have the food. So I went from not eating at all to just like getting a ton of it and eating all of it. And that's kind of continued where I do it secretly, even if there's no reason to do so. There's no one in my life that will judge me for eating that food. But it's more of a feeling of shame of eating things that I shouldn't be eating.
Okay. Feeling ashamed of eating things that you shouldn't be eating. And for context, how often do you feel like you overeat or binge eat or feel out of control with food, let's say on a weekly basis?
Probably 3 to 5 times, depending on what's going on during the week.
Is it usually at night?
No, it wouldn't be at night. It's usually in the like evening, like late afternoon before supper. So like on my drive home from work, I'll stop somewhere and get something and then eat it in the car on the way home.
Okay.
And then have suppers and like not say anything. This feels
Okay.
really important to say this out loud.
No, there's nothing that you can ever say that I either haven't experienced myself or haven't heard from the women I work with. So I want you to know that it's actually, I know it can be really hard and you're so brave for like being willing to open up and be vulnerable. You're helping so many women right now because now you're helping other people feel seen, feel less alone, and feel less broken because there's millions of women out there who are struggling with this as well, who are feeling like there's something wrong with them. And what we really want to do is right now we're in the diagnosing phase, right? So you mentioned that you are overeating, binge eating 3 to 5 times a week, usually in the evening / late afternoon before supper. Do you live alone now? Do you live with a partner?
I live with a partner.
Okay. So when you overeat in the car before getting home, what happens afterwards? Do you still eat dinner because you feel like you should with your partner? Do you like what does the rest of your night look like?
Yeah, I usually will still eat dinner just because I don't want to share the fact that I overate in the car. So it's kind of like to cover that up. So
Mhm.
usually I'll have dinner and then that would be it for most evenings.
Okay.
Yeah, if he's not home, I won't have dinner because I mean, there's no one around to see it. So
Right. And when you have dinner, are you like full already by the time that you eat?
yes, yeah.
Okay. All right, perfect. So now we're going to go into identifying the different causes. So the first thing that we want to address is there a physical trigger? From what you've told me so far, I don't think so, but I still want to kind of get a sense of it. So when you're ending work and you're going to whatever, the grocery store, the corner store, is there physical hunger present?
Um, there might be, but it's not like that's not what drives it. It's not because I'm feeling hungry. Like regardless if I am or not, the
Okay.
same thing will happen.
Perfect. Now, the second thing is so there's going to be usually 3 causes, 3 triggers. One will be physical hunger. So sometimes this can happen if someone doesn't eat enough during the day. Maybe they skip breakfast or they try to do low carb or low calorie. That used to be me at the end of the workday. I haven't eaten enough. I'm like a 2 on the hunger scale. I just want to get my hands on some food. Then you've got another trigger, which will be emotional trigger, right? An emotional reason. So if I were to ask you at the end of the day, if it's not a physical need that you're trying to fill, is there a chance that you're turning to food because there's stress, anxiety, or any kind of emotional reason behind it?
It could be the case sometimes. Like I think I tend to binge more the more stressed I am. Like instead of just the evening, there'll be more occasions where I'm doing it. But I wouldn't say that's the case every single time.
Okay. So then, on those times where it's not emotional reasons, if you had to guess, what do you think is driving that behavior?
I almost feel like it's just that, like, again, logically, I know this is not the case, but it's that feeling of like, I'm not going to be able to have this if I don't have it now.
Perfect. I'm not going to be able to have this if I don't have it now. Give me an example of one of those foods.
Like potato chips are one of the big ones for me.
Okay. Do you have potato chips at home?
No, because I don't think they can live in my house for any amount of time.
Okay. So that's the number one alarm. So one of the worst advice that people get when it comes to overeating and binge eating and emotional eating is avoid those foods. Keep those foods out of the house, because then what you're doing is you're putting those foods on a pedestal and you're perpetuating this. It's not even just a flawed thought that you have that I'm not going to be able to have this later. It's a fact because you're not allowing yourself to have it at home, right? Sometimes there's people who will have that thought, but they actually do have the food at home. So it's like, it's a cognitive distortion. But for you, you're actually creating this rule around the food. And also, your thoughts are incredibly powerful. So your brain and your mind, it will take in whatever information that you plant in there and it will create it in your physical reality. So when you are telling yourself repeatedly, I can't trust myself around food, I can't trust myself around potato chips, I gotta keep them out of the house. Well, your brain is like, all right, well, you're telling me that that's the case. So every time that you're around potato chips, you're gonna binge, right? Self-fulfilling prophecy. So right now I can see that when I'm talking about this, there might be a part of you that's a little scared because you're like, oh, what does this mean? Does this mean that I have to bring potato chips in the house? Like, if I were to pause right now and bring it back to you, how do you feel and what's coming up for you?
It's just like the feeling that it's just going to be worse if I have them in the house.
Does it feel good right now?
To not have them
Yeah.
or
Do
to
you
have
feel in control around potato chips? Does it feel good
no,
to binge before work?
no.
So this is a really common yet flawed way of thinking, and this keeps people stuck in the binge restrict cycle for a really long time, is this belief that these rules, these constraints, these restrictions that I've created for myself, they're making things better. They're making me feel at least somewhat in control. And then when I ask them, do you currently feel in control? They're like, no, I don't. And we never stop and ask ourselves, is it possible that these constraints, these rules, these restrictions that I've posed on myself are the cause of these behaviors? And the reason why most people feel this way is because, and you've probably experienced this too, in the past, you've lived in extremes. Either you have no rules and restrictions, so you associate that with being out of control and binge eating and all over the place and chaotically spiraling out of control, or you've got the rules and restrictions and you feel temporarily in control. Can you relate to that?
Yes, absolutely.
And the thing is that it's this constant pendulum from one extreme to another that is causing you to have these chaotic behaviors around food. And every time that you've tried to not have rules or not have restrictions, or maybe you didn't even try, but it just happened because you had an injury or you were on vacation or whatever, the reason why it felt really chaotic for you is not because there's something wrong with you. It's not because you can't be trusted around food. It's because you didn't do the work underneath the surface, right? Setting up the foundation so that you address the root cause of those behaviors. So, what I mean by that, we'll kind of refresh and go back from the start. So, you said, I'm afraid that if I do have these chips in the house, it's going to be worse. So, take me through the scenario of, let's say for the next week, you did buy chips and you did bring it in the house. What do you think would happen? Like, where does your brain go?
Well, just that I would eat all of them. I guess there would be no chips in the house at that point because I would eat them all.
Okay. In what setting? Like what, when you see that scene in your mind, what are you doing when you're eating all of these chips?
And like in the sense that I'm binging on them, as I always do.
Do you think that holding on to the thought that I always binge on chips is serving you?
No.
One of the things I actually had this conversation with my clients last night, we were talking about the power of your words. And notice the words that you use after saying I am or I always. Because whatever you tell yourself, whatever follows those words, you will perpetuate in your life. If you're someone who identifies as I am lazy, do you think that you are likely to engage in behaviors that a non-lazy person would do?
Well, no, because even if you do, you probably wouldn't see it.
Right. So if you identify as someone who it says, I always binge on chips, here's what's likely going to happen. I want you to see the power of your mind right now. You bring chips home and your partner leaves the room or he goes for a walk and you're home alone for 10 minutes. Now your brain is ringing an alarm. Hey, you always binge on chips. And we want to be right, right? We always want to be right. So you better go to that cupboard and you better binge on chips because this is what you do. This is your behavior. And then you're going to binge on chips. And what's going to happen afterwards is that voice is going to come back in and say, see, this is what you do. You always binge on chips. And then that belief is going to get even more deeply ingrained in your subconscious because your thoughts trigger your behavior and your behavior reinforces your thoughts. And that's why we get stuck in this vicious loop. Does that all make sense so far?
That makes sense.
Okay. So I just want to do a little check-in. At this point, do you have any questions about what we covered so far?
No, everything that you're saying makes sense. I guess for me, it's still that logical part of my mind. Like a lot of times when I know something makes sense, it's just that like, is it going to work? Like, can I do this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now we're going to talk about strategies, right? Because what most people do, you can understand this, but what's important is, so what do I do? Right? Like that's really what I do with my clients is, okay, now you can understand this, but what are the specific action steps, tangible things and strategies that you can implement? So I'm going to share with you the most important ones that you can apply right now, right? There's a lot of strategies that I teach inside Food Freedom Academy, but I'm thinking about the things that you can implement this week in order to start seeing actionable results and changes in your life. So let's start with the first one, which is going to be systematic habituation. Have you ever heard those terms before?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So habituation is the process of repeatedly exposing yourself to a certain stimulus until it loses its effect. So think of the first time that you said, I love you, or that you heard someone say, I love you to you. You probably had like this really big emotional, physical response. And then the second time probably felt really great too. But over time, it still feels really lovely to hear, but you don't have that kind of the same intense response in your body. Same for like a new car smell. You smell it a lot the first few times. Same with your own perfume. Research shows that the same thing happens with food. You progressively habituate yourself to a certain food so that it loses its effect, its allure, its sense of specialty in your mind. Now, when you haven't done this work, when you are a chronic dieter or you're trying to restrict or avoid and you're working on the surface level, you actually impede the systematic habituation effect because either you're placing constraints around it, or even when you are eating the food, you're doing it from a place of mental restriction. I shouldn't be eating this. This is bad for me. And so every time that you do that, you're just putting the food higher up on a pedestal. So it's still really special. It's still out of reach for you. It's still that forbidden fruit. So what we want to do in systematic habituation is you want to expose yourself to that food in a way that is really structured and organized so that you create a positive experience with that food and you can over time start trusting and feeling at peace around it. So when I'm working with my clients, we do this in stages and we work with a certain food and we really work through all of those different foods. So you mentioned potato chips, so we're going to start there. Okay? So are you ready? Is this a challenge that you are ready to take for the next week?
I am, yeah.
Awesome. Tell me a type of chip that you really enjoy.
I'm really boring. I like the just plain chips.
Okay, that's honestly a lot of people are like that.
They're really exciting stuff.
Okay, so plain chips. This is what you're going to do this week. You're going to go to the supermarket and you're going to buy a bag of plain chips. Buy 2 if you want to, right? So either 1 or 2. And then you're going to bring those chips home. Now, when you're buying those chips, right now, what thought do you think will go through your mind?
When I'm buying them, that they won't last long.
So if you hold on to that thought, if you allow that thought to win, what do you think is going to happen?
Exactly that.
Mm-hmm. So this is a really important thing that I want you and all my listeners to understand. You have power over your mind. Do you know that? Do you know that you have control of your thoughts?
Again, on a logical level, I do, but sometimes they feel more in control than I would like.
Mm-hmm. And that's because a lot of people don't have the tools that they need to take control of their thoughts. But when you know how to not only be aware of the thoughts that you're having, but how to change them, everything changes for you because you can apply these kind of frameworks to all areas of your life to create more positive, empowering thoughts. So now you've brought attention to the thought that you're likely going to have, which is these won't last. How can we change that thought right now so that when you do buy those chips, you have a different, more positive, more empowering thought?
I mean, I can just think of them as all other grocery where they're just food that'll be in my house.
Mm-hmm. How does that feel for you?
Pretty neutral.
Okay. So that's really great. Another one that you can have, which is more geared towards the next week, it could be, I'm really excited to do this experiment so that I can learn how to feel at peace around chips. I can learn how to feel trusting of myself around chips. So when you can look at it that way, instead of saying, here I am buying chips, setting myself for failure once again, and instead you're saying, this is my first day where I'm actually learning how to have a healthy relationship with food. How does that feel for you?
That would be great. And I mean, it's really interesting to think how it should just be food. Like it has so much power, and I feel like it's had so much power in my life for so long, but it's just food. Like it's just something you eat. It's that like dichotomy of feeling like it's almost a being in itself that has power over me when in fact it's just food. It should be okay.
Yeah.
It makes me sad that, oh, I know I'm not the only person, but a lot of women especially have lived with food having that power in their lives.
Yeah. And what a beautiful opportunity to see that you're now going to step in the process of regaining your power and your control. I used to be that way food was the center of my universe. I thought about food 24/7. From the moment I woke up to the moment I went to bed, it determined how I could feel about myself. And I am a living, breathing example of someone who now I love food. And that's one thing I want everyone to understand is when you heal your relationship with food, it does not mean that you will lose the love and the pleasure that you feel for food. I love food. I'm a big foodie. What will happen though is that it won't be as important to you. It won't have this hold and this control over you. And so you mentioned these are things that I understand intellectually, and it makes me sad that food has so much control over me. So one thing that is going to really help you that I want you to start paying attention to is your inner self-talk, the words that you use either out loud or in your mind. And whenever you say words or you think a thought that is the old you, the one who used to give power to food, notice it. And in that moment, you want to reframe it. You want to reframe it towards the mindset and the thoughts and the words of someone who just feels neutral, who feels at peace around food. And I know at first, you might not even know what to replace it with, right? And it would be a whole other hour for us to go into that. And this is something that I really love, like providing those for my clients, kind of like a fill in the blank. But what you can really do is you can become aware of it and start reframing. But going back to our systematic habituation. So you're buying the chips. We're at step one. We're buying the chips, and be aware of the thoughts that you're having. So remember what's going to be the new thought that you're bringing into this experiment?
It's that I'm starting a new experiment with the chips, and they're coming home with me, and they're just going to be groceries in my house.
Beautiful. All right, now you're going to bring them home and you're going to start the systematic habituation process. So let's say that you start tomorrow. Now, when you expose yourself to one of your quote unquote trigger foods, one of the things that I really recommend, it's almost not a recommendation, it's really like something to consider, is you don't want to do it when you're physically hungry. Because especially chips, delicious, perfectly acceptable. However, they're not filling, right? Like no one's ever been like, I'm hungry, so I'm going to eat chips. Because what's going to happen is if you're physically hungry, your body needs nutrients. It needs carbs, proteins, fats. So if you start eating chips, what you're going to notice is that you're going to need to eat a really big quantity in order to feel satisfied and full. And then that's just going to perpetuate this belief that there's something wrong with you, that you're going to binge, which is not true. It's just your biology that was taking over in that moment. So you want to make sure that you're not physically hungry. So a really good time to do it is like about an hour after eating. So making sure that you've gotten what you need and that you're like really present both physically and mentally. Now, the second thing that you're going to want to do is, do you typically eat straight out of the bag?
Yeah.
Okay. Makes it very easy to overeat as well, because then the pattern is automatic. Do you feel like there's sometimes where you're eating and you end up at the bottom of the bag and you think, how did I even get here? Like you kind of just fog out.
Yeah, like when did that happen? Yeah.
When did that happen? Yeah. And you're like, did I even taste those chips? Like, I don't even know what they tasted like. So that's mindless eating. And that can go hand in hand with mental restriction, emotional eating, even physical restriction. So what you want to do is you want to practice being mindful, being present. So I recommend that you you grab yourself a bowl and you make yourself a bowl. When you make yourself this bowl, you don't want to think, this is the only bowl I'm allowed to have. I'm only allowed to have this one bowl, because that means you're still setting constraints and restrictions on yourself. And what's going to happen is you're going to be eating this one bowl. And then when you're done, you're going to think, oh my God, I want more. no, I shouldn't have. She said I can't have. And then there's going to be this back and forth. And then you're going to go back because you're going to have this rebellious attitude. And then you're going to end up overeating. So you want to remind yourself, all right, I'm going to start with this one bowl. I'm really going to pay attention to how every single chip tastes, how it feels in my body. And after this bowl, if I want some more and I'm really mindful and present and intentional, I can go and have some more. If I don't want some more, that's okay because I can have it again. Whether it's in an hour, whether it's tomorrow, this food is present, I can have it again. If I finish the bag in 3 days, I can go and buy it again. Because you want to remind yourself that this food is not going away, that it's not the last time that you can eat this food. Do you follow so far? Do you have any questions?
No, I don't have any questions. That makes sense.
Okay, wonderful. So you grab your bowl. Now, when you're starting this process, I recommend that you eat in an environment where there's not a lot of distractions, because mindfulness is a muscle. So just like something becomes more automatic as you do it, like you don't have to think about driving a car now. It's very easy for you. But when you first did it, you really had to pay attention. You didn't want to talk to someone else. You really wanted to be present. So same goes with mindfulness. Same goes with intuitive eating. So you want to be present and you want to be like really free of distractions. So if you can, not in front of the TV, not while having a conversation, like it's gonna probably feel very uncomfortable for you, but sitting at a table, just you and your bowl, no phone, no scrolling. And I want you to go one chip at a time. And I want you to also implement what I call the describe it to me method. So pretend that I'm sitting next to you. I've got Sabrina who's sitting next to you, and I've never tasted plain original chips before. Okay? I live in a hole apparently, and I've never tasted them before. And you have to describe to me how it tastes, the flavor, the texture, like really in detail of every single chip. What that's going to do is it's going to make you slow down and pay attention to how the food tastes. I've had a lot of my clients do that, and they'll realize they don't even like the taste of the food that they couldn't control themselves around. Like they've done it with Twinkies and certain types of cookies and Thai Express, and they realize, oh, it's not even that good. I just wasn't even tasting it because it was so mindless and automatic. So slow yourself down, go one chip at a time, and once you're done, evaluate. How was that? How did that taste? How do I feel? And if you want to go for more, go for more. Allow yourself to do it. And even if you end up overeating, don't beat yourself up, because this is going to be an amazing learning experience for you to see, okay, what worked, what didn't work, what felt good, what didn't feel good. I've actually had the best opportunities for growth and for learning from the things I've done that haven't felt good. So what I mean by that is I used to overeat every time I went to the restaurant. And when I started working on healing my relationship with food, I remember this one specific time where there was still a few bites on my plate. I was full, and I just decided to eat it anyways because I was like, I've paid for it, all of that mindset. And I remember walking away from the restaurant thinking, this doesn't feel good physically. And I really wish that I had stopped just a few bites earlier, because then I would be able to walk away and feel good physically and mentally and have really enjoyed my time at the restaurant. So the next time I went to a restaurant and I had a few bites on my plate, I remembered, how did you feel last time when you finished your plate even though you were full? I didn't feel great. I would much rather push it away now and walk away feeling good, because regardless, it's a few bites. I've paid for the food anyways. For me to put it in my body or to put it in the trash, it's trash anyways. And I walked away and I felt so much better. And that was my moment of, this is how I want to feel every time I leave from a restaurant. So you want to do that this week and you want to practice. And let's say that you do it tomorrow night. And then the night after, you can give yourself full permission to do it again. And also recognize if, like, you're not obligated to. So let's say the night after, you're like, I'm not craving chips tonight. Don't force yourself to do it. Also, don't restrict yourself from it. Start tuning in to what your body is communicating with you. Start tuning into your intuition. And what I find is such a beautiful mindset and exercise to do is I want you to pretend that your body is a friend. It's not you, because you are not your body, right? And I know that that can be a hard concept to understand at the beginning of a body image healing journey, but you are not your body. So imagine that your body is another entity. Start talking to it like it's a friend that you're trying to work with. What do you need from me? How do you feel, right? What would you like me to do? And you're going to start that instead of feeling at war with your body and feeling like it's constantly fighting against you or you're fighting against it, you're going to start seeing that we have a common purpose. So Danielle, you've got your focus for the next week. We're going to reconnect when you've gone through this experiment. And I want to thank you so much for being open and being willing to get coached. Like, this is probably the most important trait that I see in my clients when it comes to their success in their journey towards healing their relationship with food and their bodies and overcoming binge eating, emotional eating, overeating, food obsession. The biggest trait is being willing to be coachable, being willing to take these strategies and to start with a blank slate and to put it into action and to learn from it. So I have no doubt that this is just the beginning for you. So I really appreciate you. And I know that you are going to help a lot of women who are listening to this right now by sharing your story and by being willing to get coached. To everyone who is listening, if you want to be able to have one of these coaching over coffee sessions, if you want to be considered for one of these spots, I really love doing these. I love being able to not only help the person I'm coaching, but also then to share it to my thousands of listeners. So you can send me a DM at sabrinamagnan.health on Instagram and write the words coaching over coffee. So share this episode with a friend, with someone you know who could get some value from it. Have an amazing day. And just a reminder that you are enough, you are worthy, you're amazing. See you next time. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magnan Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode.